In 1917, as the world was engulfed in the chaos of the First World War, a woman walked into the U.S. Patent Office and filed a patent for a device that would change driving forever. It was a simple, elegant solution to a problem that had plagued drivers since the very beginning of the automobile age: how to see through rain and snow. Her invention was the automatic electric windshield wiper. Her name was Charlotte Bridgewood, and if you've never heard of her, there's a good reason for that. You've probably heard of Robert Kearns, the man who famously battled the Ford Motor Company in the 1980s over his invention of the intermittent windshield wiper. His story was so compelling, it was made into a major Hollywood film, Flash of Genius. But the woman who invented the very first automatic wiper system, the foundation upon which all modern wipers are built, received no movie, no fame, and no fortune. Instead, her patent expired, her invention was exploited by major corporations, and her name was almost completely erased from the history of the automobile. This is the story of a forgotten female inventor, a vaudeville star who juggled a life on the stage with a passion for mechanical engineering. It's the story of how a brilliant idea was ignored, then stolen, and how the woman who should have been celebrated as a pioneer of automotive safety was left with nothing. This isn't just a story about a patent. It's a story about what happens when an idea is born too early, and when the person who has that idea is a woman in a world that isn't ready to listen. To understand Charlotte Bridgewood, you have to understand the world of vaudeville. Born in 1861, Charlotte was not a trained engineer or a corporate inventor. She was a creature of the stage. Along with her husband, Samuel, they were part of a popular vaudeville act called the Bridgewoods. They were entertainers, traveling from city to city, performing in the bustling, chaotic theaters that were the heart of American entertainment at the turn of the 20th century. Life in vaudeville was a grind. It was a world of constant travel, of living out of trunks, of performing multiple shows a day to tough, demanding audiences. But it was also a world of incredible creativity and ingenuity. Vaudeville performers were masters of invention. They had to be. They built their own props, designed their own illusions, and solved complex mechanical problems to make their act work. This was Charlotte's first education in engineering. She wasn't learning from textbooks. She was learning by doing, by solving real-world problems under immense pressure. She and her husband were successful. They toured the country, their act a staple of the vaudeville circuit. But their life was not without tragedy. In 1887, their infant son, Samuel Jr., died. The loss was devastating, and it's a shadow that hangs over Charlotte's early life. But they continued to perform, channeling their energy into their work. In 1888, they had a daughter, Florence. Florence would grow up to be a star in her own right, a famous actress on the silent screen under the name Florence Lawrence. And it's through Florence that Charlotte's story as an inventor truly begins. By the early 1900s, the automobile was beginning to transform American life. It was a noisy, unreliable, and often dangerous machine, but it represented a new kind of freedom. Florence Lawrence, who had become a huge star as the Biograph Girl, one of the first movie stars to be known by name, was an automobile enthusiast. She loved to drive. She bought her own car and insisted on driving it herself, a rare and bold choice for a woman at the time. She even said, "A car to me is something that is almost human, something that responds to kindness and understanding and care, just as people do." Charlotte, who by this time was living with her famous daughter, shared this passion. But as a practical, mechanically minded woman, she also saw the car's many flaws. She wasn't just a passenger, she was a problem solver. And one of the biggest problems she saw was the sheer danger of driving in bad weather. Picture what it was like to drive a car in 1910. The roads were often unpaved, the cars were open to the elements, and when it started to rain or snow, you were in serious trouble. Early cars had no wipers at all. Drivers would have to stop every few minutes to get out and wipe the windshield by hand, or they would simply stick their head out the side of the car to see, which was as dangerous as it sounds. The first manual windshield wipers began to appear in the early 1900s. The most famous was invented by another woman, Mary Anderson, in 1903. Her device was a lever inside the car that you had to crank by hand to move a rubber blade across the windshield. It was a brilliant invention, a huge improvement over nothing, but it was exhausting. In a heavy storm, you would be cranking the lever constantly, taking one hand off the wheel and dividing your attention. It was better than nothing, but it was far from a perfect solution. Charlotte Bridgwood saw this problem and knew there had to be a better way. As a vaudeville performer, she understood automation. She understood how to use mechanisms to create an effect without constant human effort. Why should a driver have to do all the work? Why couldn't the car do it itself? Living in New York City with her daughter, she was at the center of the new automotive world. She saw the rapid pace of innovation, and she began to tinker. She applied the same problem-solving mindset that she had used to build props for the stage to the problem of the windshield. Her idea was revolutionary for its time. Instead of a hand-cranked lever, she envisioned a system powered by the car's engine. She designed a system that used rollers, not a single blade, to wipe the windshield. And it was automatic. You could turn it on, and it would continue to wipe the windshield for you, leaving your hands free to steer and your attention focused on the road. In 1917, she was granted U.S. patent number 1,230,069 for her Storm windshield cleaner. The patent describes an electrically operated device for clearing the windshields of automobiles, streetcars, or the like. It was the world's first automatic windshield wiper. It was a leap forward in automotive safety, a device that had the potential to save thousands of lives. Charlotte had a brilliant invention, a patent to protect it, and a famous daughter who could have helped her promote it. She should have become a wealthy woman. She should have been hailed as a pioneer of automotive safety. But that's not what happened. Charlotte Bridgwood had a problem, and it was a problem that has plagued countless inventors throughout history. Her idea was too good, too early. In 1917, the automobile industry was still in its infancy. Most cars were still basic, stripped-down machines. Features that we consider standard today, like electric starters, enclosed cabins, and even something as simple as a fuel gauge, were rare luxuries. The electrical systems in early cars were notoriously weak and unreliable. They were barely powerful enough to run the ignition and the headlights. The idea of adding another electrical device, one that wasn't strictly necessary to make the car move, was seen as an expensive and unnecessary complication. Car manufacturers were focused on making cars cheaper and more reliable, not on adding new features. So when Charlotte tried to market her invention, she was met with a wall of indifference. The companies she approached, the very companies that would later make billions from her idea, weren't interested. They saw her not as a serious inventor, but as a woman, an amateur, dabbling in a world she didn't understand. They couldn't see the future. They couldn't see that in a few years, as cars got faster and roads got more crowded, her invention would become not a luxury, but an absolute necessity. And so nothing happened. Charlotte held the patent for one of the most important safety innovations in automotive history, but she couldn't find a single company willing to license it. The years ticked by. The patent sat in a drawer, a testament to a brilliant idea that the world wasn't ready for. In 1920, her patent expired. Under the patent law of the time, she had just a few years to profit from her invention. After that, it fell into the public domain. It was free for anyone to use, to modify, to improve upon, without paying her a single cent. And that is exactly what happened. Just a few years later, as cars became more common and their electrical systems more robust, the auto industry suddenly discovered the need for automatic windshield wipers. Companies like Bosch in Europe and Tricontinental Corporation, Trico, in the United States began producing their own versions of electric wipers. The first commercially successful system was a vacuum-powered wiper, which used the engine's suction to move the blades. It was a clumsy system. The wipers would slow down or stop when you accelerated, but it was automatic. And then, as electrical systems improved, the electric wiper, the very device that Charlotte had patented years earlier, became the industry standard. Cadillac was the first to make electric wipers standard equipment on their cars in 1922. Soon, every major car manufacturer followed suit. The automatic windshield wiper became a ubiquitous, essential feature of every car on the road. And Charlotte Bridgewood? She was completely forgotten. The companies that were now mass-producing her invention had no legal obligation to pay her. They had simply waited for her patent to expire and then taken her idea for free. They built fortunes on the foundation of her genius, while she was left with nothing but the satisfaction of knowing she had been right all along. It's a classic example of patent shelving, a practice where a company sees a new disruptive technology, but instead of developing it, they either ignore it or buy the patent and deliberately shelve it, waiting for it to expire so they can use the idea without paying royalties. It's a strategy that stifles innovation and robs inventors of their rightful rewards. And in the early 20th century, it was a strategy that was particularly effective against female inventors who lacked the resources and the social standing to fight back against powerful corporations. While Charlotte's story as an inventor was ending in disappointment, her daughter, Florence Lawrence, was living a life of spectacular fame and fortune. Florence was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era. She was the first movie star, the face that had launched 1,000 ships, or at least sold 1,000 movie tickets. Her life was a whirlwind of movie sets, adoring fans, and lavish spending. She owned multiple homes, a fleet of expensive cars, and a wardrobe that was the envy of women across America. She was the embodiment of the new, modern woman, independent, glamorous, and in control of her own destiny. But her life was also marked by tragedy and instability. She was married 3 times. She suffered serious injuries in a studio fire that left her with chronic pain. And she was a notoriously reckless spender. The fortune she made in her youth, she lost in her later years. The stock market crash of 1929 wiped out much of her savings. By the 1930s, the star who had once been the most famous woman in America was struggling to find work. Charlotte lived with Florence for much of this time, her life a quiet backdrop to her daughter's dramatic ups and downs. It's a strange and poignant reversal of roles. The mother, a brilliant inventor whose practical, life-saving invention should have provided her with a lifetime of security, was instead depending on her famous but unstable daughter. The daughter, whose fame was built on the ephemeral world of image and illusion, was for a time the family's primary breadwinner. What did Charlotte think as she watched the world embrace the automatic windshield wiper, the very device that she had invented? What did she feel as she saw companies like Cadillac and Ford advertising their new electric wipers as the latest in modern convenience without a single mention of her name? Did she feel anger, resignation, a bitter sense of irony? We don't know. Unlike her invention, her feelings were not recorded. She left behind no diaries, no letters expressing her frustration. She seems to have accepted her fate with a quiet dignity, the same practical, no-nonsense attitude that had defined her life on the vaudeville circuit. She had solved the problem. She had patented the solution. And if the world was too slow to recognize her genius, that was the world's problem, not hers. In 1938, her daughter Florence, battling illness and depression, took her own life. It was the final tragedy in a life that had been filled with both dazzling success and profound sorrow. Charlotte, now an elderly woman, was left truly alone. She died just a year later, in 1939. She was buried in an unmarked grave, her contributions to both the stage and the automobile all but forgotten. Her name and her invention would lie dormant for decades, a secret hidden in the dusty archives of the U.S. Patent Office. For more than half a century, the story of the windshield wiper belonged to men. Mary Anderson was sometimes mentioned for her manual wiper, but the story of the automatic wiper was a story of corporate innovation, of companies like Bosch and Trico developing and perfecting the technology. The name Charlotte Bridgewood was nowhere to be found. And then, in the 1980s, came Robert Kearns. Kearns was an engineer who invented and patented a version of the intermittent windshield wiper, a system that could pause between wipes. He pitched this idea to the Ford Motor Company, who rejected it, only to come out with their own version a few years later. Kearns sued Ford and then Chrysler for patent infringement. His legal battles lasted for more than a decade. He was portrayed as a modern-day David fighting against the Goliath of the auto industry. His story was one of a lone inventor, a flash of genius, being crushed by corporate greed. In 2008, his story was turned into the film Flash of Genius, starring Greg Kinnear. The film cemented the popular image of the windshield wiper's invention as a story of male genius and corporate struggle. But in a strange way, the renewed interest in the history of the wiper that the film generated helped to bring Charlotte's story back into the light. Researchers and historians digging back into the patent records rediscovered her 1917 patent for the first electric automatic wiper. They realized that long before Robert Kearns, long before even Trico and Bosch, a woman from the world of vaudeville had solved the fundamental problem. What emerged was a more complex and more interesting story of innovation. It wasn't a single flash of genius. It was a process, an evolution. Mary Anderson had the first brilliant idea, Charlotte Bridgewood had the second, the leap to automation, and Robert Kearns had the third, the refinement of intermittency. Each built on the work of the last. But for decades, only the men's stories were being told. Today, thanks to the work of these researchers, Charlotte Bridgewood is finally beginning to get the recognition she deserves. Her name is appearing in articles, in books on automotive history, and in lists of forgotten female inventors. She is being celebrated not just as an inventor, but as a symbol of the countless women whose contributions to science and technology have been ignored or erased. Her story forces us to reconsider what an inventor looks like. She wasn't a man in a lab coat. She wasn't a corporate engineer. She was a performer, an entertainer, a woman who applied the practical problem-solving skills she learned on the stage to the world of mechanics. She saw a problem, and she fixed it. It's a story that is both uniquely American and deeply frustrating. The next time you get in your car on a rainy day and flip a switch to turn on your windshield wipers, think of Charlotte Bridgewood. Think of the vaudeville star who more than a century ago had the brilliant idea that you shouldn't have to choose between steering your car and seeing where you're going. Think of the woman who patented a life-saving device only to see it ignored and then exploited by a world that wasn't ready for her. Her story is a powerful reminder that history is not always written by the victors, but by those who control the narrative. For decades, the narrative of the automobile was a narrative of male inventors and corporate giants. Women were relegated to the role of passengers, of decorative additions to the advertisements. But the truth is that women have been there from the very beginning, not just as drivers, but as innovators, as engineers, as problem solvers. Charlotte Bridgewood never received the fortune she was owed. She never saw her name in the headlines as a pioneer of automotive safety. She died in obscurity, buried in an unmarked grave, while the companies that used her invention grew into global empires. But her idea survived. It was too good, too necessary, too obviously right to be forgotten forever. It's an idea that is now in almost every car on the planet. It's an idea that has saved countless lives in the centuries since she first patented it. She may not have gotten the fame or the fortune, but she got something more important. She was right. She saw the future, even if the men in charge couldn't. And in the quiet, rhythmic sweep of the windshield wiper, her legacy of quiet, practical genius lives on. She is the ghost in the machine, the forgotten mother of a device we all take for granted. And it's about time we remembered her name.
If this story made you angry, if it inspired you, if it made you wonder who else has been erased, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now.
Because if we don't tell these stories, who will? And if we don't remember these women, who else gets forgotten tomorrow?
They can steal credit, they can rewrite papers, they can dominate textbooks, but they can't stop us from finding the truth and sharing it.
That's why you need to subscribe to Women Erased. Let's rewrite history together.